Hello, hello, Andrew D. Bryce. You are on the Genius Zone. Welcome to the Genius Zone here.
Thank you, Miss Terry. I appreciate the invite and I look forward to our conversation tonight.
Well, you know what the Genius Zone is about is pain to power. And I believe a person of your caliber knows exactly what pain to power is all about. In fact, we're going to be opening that up with your incredible experience that you've had as a person in the army, as a person who knows what crisis is like, and how we can actually perform better through tactical stillness. So I'm really loving this because from where I'm standing, Andrew, we call this bending time in the world of neuro-linguistic programming. Because when people are in a crisis mode or people are stressed, what happens is time speeds up and then we go into a bit of a panic, which you would understand about. But what you're talking about is almost like slowing down time and changing the way that we feel so we can be present through a crisis. Have you ever experienced being completely still and present during a crisis?
Yes, I have several times throughout my career, um, both in combat and civilian sector. We lived in the South in the USA, and anybody that's familiar with the Southern Hemisphere of the United States, there's a lot of tornadoes. Um, we actually watched an F5 tornado go past our home and destroy the neighborhood next to us.
Wow.
Everything for the next week was pure crisis in our neighborhood. But being able to step back, look at the situation, understand that people needed help, they needed somebody to be calm, regardless of what was going on around them. It's
Yep.
understanding that, yes, you can do it. You just have to be able to acknowledge it and move forward.
Yeah. Do you feel that people are innately sometimes born with that kind of ability, or because of life situations, they learn it from a very early age? The reason that I'm asking this is before I even became a coach myself, I remember certain events happening, like an event where we were, building on a house and there was a sudden flash flood and we had a second story. And it was costing us a lot of money for a young couple at the time. And our ceiling literally caved in, which meant that all of a sudden we were watching every part of our house just literally deteriorate. Everything just began to kind of move into this, destruction, and, our possessions and our clothing, and then everything that we owned, we watched crumble. And I just can remember it was almost like time did slow down and things began to go in slow motion. So I'm not exactly sure whether, we're given an innate, I guess, preparation as human beings, but you've been in quite critical situations yourself. And obviously, you have to stay calm. And I believe one of them was your experience with being on a cliff and you yourself being scared of heights. Can you talk me through that?
So, in that scenario that we talked about, yes, I am extremely terrified of heights. Standing on the side of a cliff or side of a building, not my fun area to be, but yet I can crew a helicopter and fly in the helicopter all day long. Makes no sense to me, um, but it is what it is. That day when walking up towards the cliff, literally my mind went into frantic mode. The only way I could navigate out of that was to literally turn around and go back down the trail and find an area that was well away from the cliff, but it allowed me to slow back down, take some deep breaths, listen to the birds, listen to the noise around me, the wind in the trees, allow nature to help ground me in the situation to where I could then focus and enjoy the rest of the day.
It's hard to kind of fathom how if a person is in a complete panic, how you can suddenly go, okay, stop, listen to, the birds, ground yourself. However, I understand. I suddenly had a flashback to being in Bali, and I mentioned that I'd been in Bali just recently, and I was actually asked to do a transformation on a retreat whilst I was also celebrating some very close family's birthday. And the first thing that I taught, and I know both these ladies that met me over in Bali, they came in nervous. One of them looked like glass. She looked like if you touched her, she's going to shatter. She looked so pent up, so nervous, so out of her comfort zone. And I know the 101 in NLP is getting people to see what they see, hear what they hear, and feel what they feel. But surely in a crisis situation, do you think it's possible to get a person to be able to do that if there is this full-on crisis going on?
Yes, I do. It takes understanding, one, what their body language is telling them. Like you described the lady you were talking about, she was glass. She looked like if you reach up and touch her on the cheek, she would just shatter. Acknowledging where you physically see they're at in their state of mind allows you to start asking the simple questions to pull them back into a grounded state. Sometimes, and ironically, there was a post on LinkedIn that I seen yesterday, and I made this exact comment on that post. Sometimes the best help we can offer is the direct question. Ask the hard question. Ask that question that makes them stop and go, wait a minute, what did you just ask? That allows their mind to stop long enough for if they've got any self-control, they can grab that self-control at that moment to start that tactical stillness pause to regroup.
Wow. Because I know you are also the author of the ARC series, Beneath the Noise, and Reclaiming the Pause. And that's a powerful exploration into obviously that dialogue of stillness and discovering clarity beneath the constant noise of life. So can you talk us through, this book and what someone out there that is in crisis mode every day, and maybe people are living a life where they are panicked? Because I know if people lose their sense of, usually where they either lose a sense of their love and connection maybe with a loved one, or they lose their sense of certainty about, their job or where their life is going, or they have a sense that they're not important. They say that those three factors can cause people to be very, I guess, unpresent, if you will, and in their head a lot. And obviously, this book is about coming out of your head and into your senses. So can you talk to me about the book Beneath the Noise?
So the book Beneath the Noise, Reclaiming the Pause is literally just that. How do you navigate through the noise of day-to-day life, what's going on in your mind, and get back to a position to where you can reclaim that pause? Now, I'm not the typical author. I don't write strictly from a third person. All of my books walk with the reader. As you're reading the book, it literally feels like you're having a conversation. You're not reading a book to read the book. A friend of mine has that book, and he's had it for almost 8 months, and he's only made it through chapter 3 because he keeps going back. He'll read a section of it, he'll think about it, he'll reflect on it, and then he goes back. He relayed to me not long ago that he literally reads passages to his team members at work.
Wow.
And I also send out Monday morning messages to a whole group of people on Messenger and text message, that based on that principle or based on one of the other books in a different series, I pull out specific things and I put them into a series, and I just run those series every Monday to help people start out their Monday to be able to stop, have something to fall back on. All of my books, especially Beneath the Noise, that was the first book I ever wrote, um, literally helps people by walking with them. I don't tell people what to do. I don't lay out things that they have to do. It literally feels like they're having a conversation with a book of all things that also helps them have conversations with people.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So, what do you think is the dialogue most people are having with themselves that is actually holding themselves back? Because we did talk backstage about how people tend to make up excuses. They want to achieve great things in their life, but their daily habits and rituals are not kind of congruent and honoring who they want to become. Can you talk me through that?
So the irony with changing one habit, and based on all the studies out there in the National Board of Health and Wellness Coaching and their studies, it takes 6 months to effectively change one habit.
Oh,
So
wow.
if you have navigated your life and you have allowed constant change, life expectations, other people's expectations to influence your day-to-day habits, it's very hard as an individual to reclaim those habits and make positive change. So as you work through that navigation, it's a challenge. You have to be able to get away from, oh, I don't feel like it, or that's just too difficult to get accomplished today. I'll put it off till tomorrow. Those little excuses, and I'm going to call them what they are, they're excuses, keep us from making changes. One of the things I love to use, everybody makes New Year's resolutions. I honestly do not. But as I listen to people talk about their New Year's resolutions, what I find funny is 3 to 4 weeks into the new year, they've forgotten what those New Year's resolutions were because they've never even started them.
100%. I cannot agree with you more. I gave up New Year's resolutions actually when I became an NLP practitioner, because I feel that, what you're talking about, on a conscious level, there is so much that I have had to learn through NLP about being able to find that silence within myself. And yourself, there's a lot of people that are afraid of silence. Do you think that people are kind of running away from maybe their own thoughts, and that they're afraid to be silent, and they kind of fill their lives, if you will, with a lot of busyness and noise to get away from anything?
Human nature, we are in fact our own worst enemy. Um, if we do not have a strong opinion of ourselves, or we were raised in an environment where we were never good enough, or we go into school or we go into the industry and we're always passed over, we're always not thought about, that gets in our heads. Um, some of the biggest challenges we find as a human being is, how do we peel that back to realize that everybody else's opinion of us doesn't matter. What does matter is our own opinion of ourselves. And that's not an easy road. It's not simply saying, oh, I'm a great person. You have to truly believe it in your heart and your mind. And it takes work. It takes being able to listen to other people's critiques or other people's opinions and take it for what it is, face value. Because not everything you hear is 100% true.
Yeah. And look, I can remember hearing what other people think of you is actually none of your business. And, the other element is nobody's really thinking about you, because everybody, like yourself, is thinking about themselves. So, when I recognized that, I thought, because I feel that we tend to come to our own defense as human beings, and the more stressed that we are, and the more that we've got going on in our life, the less grounded we are, the more we have to defend ourselves, and the more excuses that we're making for not doing anything. And you're all about reclaiming the pause. And can you talk to me about how you got one of your clients to actually reclaim that pause, and what their life was looking like prior to when they were doing that?
So one of the individuals I worked with was a fellow veteran. She'd experienced a lot of trauma over the course of a year. And I won't get into what those traumas are. Just suffice it to say that life threw curveball after curveball after curveball on top of health problems. A lot of the time she was in her head. She was dealing with a family dynamic that she was the oldest child and expected to step up, but the expectations were, you left, so why are you trying to be in control now? So there was a lot of moments and a lot of conversations where she was literally in her own head with all the doubt coming from family members, all the observations. So we talked through those. And I would ask her the hard questions. And one of the questions I asked her at one point is, why does it matter? And it made her stop. She had to think about answering that question. I was like, you don't know me to answer now. I said, but when we talk in a few days, I'm going to expect an answer. At the end of the day, why does what they're saying matter? When we followed back up a few days later, her response was kind of funny. She goes, I spent a lot of time thinking about that question. She goes, their opinion doesn't matter. I have things to get done. And either they're going to help me get them done as family, or I'm just going to do them because they have to be done. I was like, so it sounds like you're taking a little more control over the path you're going. She goes, yes, I am. That right there is one of those light bulb moments where it goes off in their brain that, wait a minute, they just did the work. They walked through the thought process and got to the resolution of, this is me taking control of the situation. So
owning yourself. Wow.
Yeah. So that right there is, if that book does nothing else for anybody out there, it does that once for them, it will repeat. Once they realize that they can take the control, it becomes a pattern that they start to rely on. And eventually it becomes second nature.
Yeah.
Where it's just part of their day-to-day.
I was just thinking actually about, as you were saying that story, and how people are in their heads and they're kind of almost nursing and rehearsing a lot of beliefs that are no longer relevant, that do come from the past, and they're getting so caught up in what's going on that they're losing the sight of themselves and what they can achieve in this day and moment. And there are so many people that want to achieve great things, and they have all these aspirations that they want to achieve, but then the excuses, as you've mentioned earlier, of making up excuses to hinder themselves and become scattered. But there was something also that we spoke about backstage, which I felt was very relevant, and I really want to bring it up, and that is that, what is it that makes so many people feel like they have to crash and burn or hit the wall before they actually make change? Like, do you have any tips on at what point we really need, because I'm going to be honest right here, I tend to fall into that category, and I know that I'm that person. I hit the wall really well, but I'm very good at bouncing as well. But sometimes it will take me to hit the wall. I've just seen this happen with a family member as well, where they just want to persevere with this pain that they've got going on in their body, and they refuse to do anything that's going to look like what they consider, what they believe is negative. Like, this person requires a walking aid, but they don't want to do it because they're caught up in what they believe they're going to look like. But now that person has had to hit the wall with this excruciating pain, and then they've gone, oh. But here's the funny thing, I don't know whether you've noticed this or not, Andrew, but if people actually do get to that point of surrender and they go, you know what, I think I'm just going to have to do this, quite often that's when everything changes. But what is it that there are so many people that have to hit the wall and crash and burn before they make the change?
Well, Terri, you just opened the door, so I'm going to take it. You highlighted that you have a tendency to be that person. So in working with somebody that experiences that type of situation, I won't say regularly, periodically, what I would normally do is ask them the very simple question of why. Why do you feel that you need to hit the wall before you make change when you know this is already something you do? Why do you feel that it's okay? What's causing that?
Is that their motivation tactic though? So I was kind of confronted with that, to what is it that makes me have to have something that where you can't go any further anymore, enough damage has been done, the change has got to be made now. But I mean, that doesn't give me that extra strength in character just because I can tolerate it. I think that that's damage control. But how can I change that? Because if that's a habit and a pattern, apart from, what I teach other people, what can we do to avoid, hitting the wall every time and having to go through what we're going through?
So given the fact that, and I'm going to keep using you as the example, it's not something that you do all the time. You have already acknowledged it, which is the first step. You already recognize the symptoms as they're coming on. You know it's coming. So the challenge is, how do you pick the right time when those symptoms start coming up to take that pause, to change your trajectory to where you don't have to hit the wall. You change your path because that is now your new rhythm. So as you're working with people, it's getting them to understand that just because you had that rhythm and you've dealt with it for all these years doesn't mean that rhythm has to stay. You can change it to where you never hit the wall. Now, never is a very large word. I will say the word with the caveat, it isn't 100%, because there are times in our lives where those situations are going to hit such a pace and you're going to hit that wall so quick that you can't stop it. It's going to be there before you know it. But for all those others where you acknowledge that that is there, it does happen, you already know the symptoms. You know the routine that leads into it. You can make that change. It's making yourself literally stop when you start realizing it and just redirect and refocus, because that power is inside already. If it wasn't, you would be in crisis mode all the time. And I don't see you in crisis mode all the time. I heard you say it happens, but it doesn't happen all the time. So you've already started making the change, but you haven't gone long enough for that change to really take a hold.
This is actually brilliant. This is brilliant, because I'll tell you why. You're giving some really gold nuggets here about, what to do going forward. and you recognize that I don't stay in a crisis, and and obviously nobody stays in that state. And I feel that a lot of my tools, the power tools that I've got, have really helped me to combat. And what you're demonstrating here is, the practical application of what we can do moving forward, and to observe that. And, someone from my community has just, mentioned here that, when we burn out, it's more or less something also that can come from a trauma. They haven't said it in those words, but where you don't feel like you're good enough, and where it can even come in from a lot of, either abuse or, your own personal trauma from the past. So I do have to say that, one of the things, if I set the intention, like what you're saying here is great intentionally, like you have to become aware. You have to firstly acknowledge, hey, I'm doing this. Like, I have to admit, I hadn't been acknowledging that, oh, why am I that person that when the fire is hot, I'm the one that can put out the fire. I'm really, really, really good at that. And maybe that's why, I'm a trauma coach, and that's where my beginnings come from. But at the same time, I can learn from that and go, okay, but what you've been able to really allude to me here is that we need to change that habit of not, hitting the wall before we motivate, because it's almost becomes a source of motivation. Do you think?
Yeah, it does. And
And,
there's a
and
couple
that's
of
bad.
things. Yeah, and there's a couple of things I want to touch on there. First, something we didn't talk about, and it's the way I start my health and wellness coaching sessions. My first session with any client, we talk about what their vision is. What is their health and wellness vision? And I take two approaches, 1, 3, and 5 years. Where do they see themselves mentally and physically, health wise, in the next 1, 3, and 5 years? And we talk about those topics. And most people were like, well, you've got a vision. Yeah, okay, visions are just that, they're a vision. But as we look at our own health and wellness, that vision could be your physical health, could be your mental state. But that leads right into the other thing you talked about, and that's trauma. Trauma comes in all forms. So, yes, the ARC series is one series I have. Another series I have is called Chaos. Um, that series is all about chaos we experience at home, in the workplace, in our surrounding culture, and then how do we restore that center? I wrote that series at a time when someone I know was in a very hostile work environment. And I literally wrote Chaos at Work first before I wrote the other three. As I was helping them navigate the day-to-day can't think of the right word to describe that environment, but it was very, very hostile. There was a leadership crew that literally used fear to control the employees.
Wow.
So when I wrote that book, that was literally, and yes, my book is still walking with the reader. None of my books are directive of any sort. But it was basically the conversations I had with that individual as they were navigating that workplace environment. And part of the conversation that came out was the impact at home, or the impact when they were interacting with community members, which prompted the other two books of that series, Chaos at Home, Chaos in Culture. And at the end of it, what I was able to walk them through was how they got back to restoring their self-impression of themselves, regardless of what management was saying, regardless of what their first line managers were saying. It was understanding that they are capable of, one, doing the job, two, showing up and taking care of their external customers the way they're supposed to, three, ignoring the chaotic nightmare coming from leadership. Because you can quite literally, as an employee, Here, everything is going on, but know that in your day-to-day work, you are doing everything you can to take care of the customer. Vice versa, when you go home, you leave work at work. You don't take it home with you. You focus on your family because that's your grounding. Now, you have, unfortunately, we see a lot of domestic violence situations or mental abuse situations in the home. There are ways to navigate and extract yourself out of that. But at the end of the day, you're 100% correct. Trauma, regardless of where that trauma comes from, does shape our lives going forward. The challenge is, do we allow it to control our life, or do we learn from it and move forward? I say the
Boom.
latter.
Absolutely. That's actually 101 right there. If we can't learn, and I love your system that you take people through, being aware what's happening, what are you saying to yourself, and being able to navigate through the change and learning. Because even if we've had, I mean, obviously I see clients that have had a lot of trauma, and I say, well, what if that trauma was your kind of part of your purpose, so that you can let that go and you can learn from what you've been able to go through and navigate, and turn that into your destiny of where you are out in the future, where you can be, basically turning pain to power and creating who you are as a result, which obviously being the genius zone. And I can't help wanting to ask, what do you say to a person? So if they are going through all of these elements, are their habits and their rituals, and what they do in their life every day? Because I can imagine a lot of people are waking up in damage control, grabbing the phone, thinking about what their day looks like, just being in that complete, I don't know, damage control mode. Can you talk us through the importance of, I guess, our rituals and habits, and is it important?
Well, it's very important, Terry. At the end of the day, the way we start our day sets the tone for the day. So some of the things I use that I've seen clients use, I've seen colleagues use, I take about 15 to 20 minutes in the morning. I listen to the night noises because I get up before the sun.
Wow.
I've had clients that journal first thing in the morning. They go out and they sit on the porch with their coffee and they write in a journal every day. I've never been a big journaler, but for some people it helps. It's finding something that allows you to slow down, slow your mind down, get out of the reactionary mode of, you already know your day is going to be chaotic. If you're in a hostile work environment, you know that you're going to walk into negativity as soon as you walk through the door. Don't allow that to start at home. Don't allow that to start until you walk through that door. The challenge that most people find is, you're right, they wake up and their mind immediately goes into damage control or the chaotic frantic of what is today going to bring. At some point, we need to be able to just calm that noise down and push it aside. Let that come when it comes. And it's easier said than done. It's not a simple process. My primary program is a 24-week program for a reason, because it does take up to 6 months to change one behavior. And if you try to incorporate multiple changes in that path, then you lose focus. If you pick one thing and you dedicate your focus on and you work towards it, over the course of 6 to 12 months, you can make very positive changes that cascade into other changes. Because as your body and your mind is adjusting to this new dynamic and a new way of processing things, it positively impacts everything else. You're removing the negative reinforcement and applying a positive reinforcement to your day-to-day life.
I love that. Do you know there's a book written called The Compound Effect? And, you know, quite often I will teach people who are so overwhelmed they don't actually achieve some of their projects because their brain is kind of taking in everything rather than looking at it as, okay, let's just say, for example, there's a great big room with a whole load of junk and they want to clean that room out. But then they're making up excuses, which is very classic of what you're teaching here, to prevent them from having to tackle it because their brain is thinking they have to eat the elephant all at once. And then I sort of say to them, well, firstly, you've got to look at why you want that room cleaned. And this is just a metaphor. So why is it that you want what you want? You want to achieve that great body, that clean room, that successful, you know, life that you are aiming for. And then they'll tell you the whys. And the whys are all the good things about it. You know, I'll feel good, I'll feel light, I'll feel clear, you know, I'll feel empowered. So it's not telling you about how they're going to do it, but why they want to do it. Okay, so just hitting on what you've just said there with that gold nugget, what is the first thing that you need to do? And it's interesting, even just one thing, and you talked about it having that snowball effect or that compound effect. You know, once you think about it as, okay, let's just take the first step. And even if it is, well, I'll just go into that room and I'll just simply remove all the junk that I no longer want. And there might be just a few items. Well, that's kind of like not having to shift everything. And then it's interesting, the human mind, how it works, because you do one good thing, then you feel good about the fact you did it, and then it encourages you to want to do the next thing. And so the compound effect is, I feel, what you've just said right there. And, you know, in order for people to really align with their best life, they've got to be able to become that. But also to accept, like you've said, acknowledge the things that are not working in your life. So what would you say would be, I guess, one of the biggest things? Like you talk about being still and pausing in the midst of a crisis. And, you know, it's hard to imagine how a person can just stop and pause and find that groundedness. But have you ever seen the movie Flight?
Which one?
It's called Flight. It's actually, the moral of the story is not so great, but the brain tactic is what you're talking about. So I'm going to say it anyways. But, you know, it's about a pilot who is taking illicit drugs. And what it does is it kind of like changes time. And what happens is the aeroplane is carrying about 220 people on, is about to crash. Now, you can't get much more of a crisis than that, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, when people get into that kind of crisis, it's like panic. You know, panic. You know, what are you going to do? This, that, the other thing. Everything is going so fast. But instead, he stretched time. He did exactly what you're teaching, and he did it in order to be able to change time, tell his co-pilot what to do while he tipped the plane upside down rather than going into an uncontrolled nosedive. But I guess the moral of that is that ability to be able to change time and become grounded, I believe, is really the tactic of what you're teaching here.
It is. And the irony is, I had a new client. I do an introduction call with people to make sure, one, they know what health and wellness coaching is, two, what I will and won't do, what I expect out of them. And as I was talking with the potential new client, he was telling me about his day-to-day life and the things he had going on, and the fact that he just went on his annual family vacation and it didn't feel like a vacation because of work carrying over into his vacation. That and the weather wasn't the best. They were out on a catamaran, so he was dealing with weather. And when he got back, that he'd done something he doesn't normally do, and that's he canceled all of his meetings the rest of the week. He got up Monday morning after about 2 hours of sleep, did the things in the morning, then canceled the rest of his week, which isn't something he would normally do. So we talked about the why behind that decision. And he goes, honestly, I just felt like I couldn't do anymore. I said, but why did you get to that point? And I could see him sitting there contemplating that question. He goes, because I don't know how to say no. I was like, well, it sounds like you're starting to learn how to say no. And he goes, well, kind of. I'm currently on my way up to help a friend who is in crisis mode. I'm like, so you came out of a very chaotic period of your life, but now you're going to push that aside to go help someone else who's in a crisis mode. He's like, yeah. I was like, there's a lot of work to be done there. So at the end of it, no, he did not sign as a client right now because of everything going on in his life. Right now, I don't feel he would focus the right energy to make changes. So we're going to reconnect here in about a month when his work schedule, school schedule, life in general schedule calms down enough to where he can focus. I sent him a follow-up email and he replied back. He's like, you know what? Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for the concern for my friend. He goes, I look forward to our talk in September. So it's when you find people who hit that wall, like we talked about earlier, and they start realizing that they have a little more control than what they believe they have, they start taking that control and making changes. The problem is, and him and I talked about it, I was like, you're doing that now. Who's to say you're going to do it next week? He goes, I probably won't. So I already know the path him and I are going to work on when he does come to work with me. It's getting him out of that constant state of, I need to get this done right now. And oh, by the way, I've got all these other things that have to be done right now, when in reality they don't. So it's understanding the dynamic of how those things and the compounding effect. I am familiar with the book. I'm very familiar with the theory because in the military, we call it Murphy's Law. If it's going to happen, it will.
Yes.
So it's something we live with. But yes, that compounding positive change compounds more positive change. Negative reinforces negative. And it's a simple concept that we all forget.
Yeah, I love that. And I also want to highlight that you hold a philosophy that, the power is within all of us. So, how do you draw that power out of someone who's living in constant crisis? Is it around grounding them? Is it around highlighting to them, what is actually going on? Because if the power is within us, I know that people that get to listen to this, whether it is, straight away or 5 years from now, they're going to say, well, how do I kind of elicit that power within myself?
So as we talked about prior, you have to acknowledge it. You have to be able to say it out loud and admit it. You have to be able to ask for help if you realize you can't do it on your own. Now, all three of those, 9 times out of 10, are ego-driven. We don't want to admit we have a problem. We don't want to admit it out loud. And we definitely don't want to ask for help because we don't want anybody else knowing that we're weak. But in reality, the weakness is that lack of acknowledgement, that lack of asking for help. It takes a stronger individual to acknowledge, talk about it, and ask for help than it does to be silent. At the end of the day, inside, if we can acknowledge to ourselves and acknowledge that sometimes it does require a team. It does require somebody who's willing to sit there and listen, read the body language, listen to what's being said, identify where the body language doesn't match what they're hearing, and start asking the questions to get after why there's a difference. That, at
That's
the end of the day,
amazing.
that's what I do.
Oh, and that. Do you know that sums up just about everything that I know that I learnt when I came into the world of NLP, and that is that the only reason that people are suffering is because of incongruence. So they're not congruent. So you're talking about alignment here, and knowing that you have the power within you to achieve anything that you want. You just got to get out of the way of yourself. Andrew, I just want to thank you so much for your time. I know that we haven't even touched the surface. We're going to have you back on our next broadcast another 45 minutes later, but thank you so much for coming on the show. And please go to the show notes. We will have all of the details, including Andrew's book. And thank you so much for being an integral part of today's show.
Thank you, Terri. I loved it. Look forward to our next.